I said, okay, well, draw me your dream house. And they looked at me, they kind of paused, and one of them said, well, can you show me a picture of what it should look like on your phone? And I was so taken aback because I never in a million years would have imagined that to be the response. And it wasn't just the one child that said it. They all sort of agreed. They said, yeah, we need to see a picture. How do we know what it looks like? And here we were at this crossroads where for them, the image is given to you. For them, it looks like something that someone can show you a picture of, as opposed to this thing that your imagination creates. The following is not meant to serve as medical advice. It is merely the story of my own journey and learning process. All the Unexpected, Season 2, Episode 3. Show me my dream house. Hello and welcome back. Today's topic is one that is sure to be slightly polarizing, as people on both sides of the issue tend to have rather strong opinions and set decisions on how they will or in some cases will not engage. But we're going to talk about screen time, and we're going to talk about its effects and my observations as a teacher of over 15 years and now as a parent 2 years and counting. And both roles and both types of interactions with children have produced a kind of very solid opinion on the topic for myself. But yes, I think how I'd like to approach this would be less of a lecture, less of finger pointing. It's not about what anyone's doing wrong or right, but merely a discussion surrounding the information available to us, surrounding the alternatives to the norm, and kind of really just looking at how we approach this paradigm and how we approach our children's interaction with technology as the world continues to change, as the world continues to evolve, as we as a society continue to integrate technology into our daily lives in everything from the simple handheld devices to the smart assistants to a dishwasher. I saw the other day that apparently can order itself more soap when it runs low. So, brave new world indeed. I wanted to start off with a story of something that happened while I was teaching, and it really kind of opened my eyes as to how children's outlook on things had shifted and how our use of technology and the role it played in their lives really changed one of these kind of universal childhood truths. And so I was teaching a group of third graders and 8 to 9 years old roughly. And I would often on Friday, because art education has been really phased out of many school districts, unfortunately, try to do something while still related to the specialist role I had was art related, because it felt like something that I could sort of do in the small little battle against the raging tide of the obliteration of all cultural education for our children. And so I had asked the kids to draw me a picture of their dream house. And I remember as a child this being such a great free drawing project that they would give us every once in a while. And, You could use a big rectangular piece of paper and draw what the different rooms would look like. And you'd have a room that was a swimming pool and a room that was, a bunny hatchery or whatever it was. And it was fanciful and it was exciting, and you could make it whatever color you wanted. And I just remember as a child this being one of those really fun things to do. I could design a house that had everything I wanted in it, and to my imagination's content. And so I figured, okay, this is, a fun one-off assignment to do with the kids. And so I said, okay, this is what we're going to do today. And I sat them around and I said, okay, well, draw me your dream house. And they looked at me, they kind of paused, and one of them said, well, can you show me a picture of what it should look like on your phone? And I was so taken aback because I never in a million years would have imagined that to be the response. And it wasn't just the one child that said it. They all sort of agreed. They said, yeah, we need to see a picture. How do we know what it looks like? And here we were at this crossroads where for them, the image is given to you. For them, it looks like something that someone can show you a picture of, as opposed to this thing that your imagination creates. And it was sobering to me because I said, wow, like here we've reached a moment where kids just have stopped being fanciful in that sense, because so much of what was once required for them to imagine is now handed to them. And so instead of this fun, fanciful assignment that would have been draw your dream house, have it look like whatever you want in any color and 100 rooms or one giant yurt or whatever it could be, it became sort of stressful to them because they said, well, we don't know what it looks like. We need to see a picture. We need something produced for us in order to produce a product. And I would go on later to do a lot of research and really start to understand what happens to the actual growth of a child's imagination and how we've shifted what that looks like as we continue to hand them prepackaged everything. And what having the handheld devices, what having the iPads and the constant input of things does is it gives them everything prepackaged. They no longer have to imagine what it looks like. They no longer have to come up with any of the framework or the scenery or the colors or any of that, because it's already there. And I think about what this means as we look at a future where the metaverse will be a thing, where we look at a future where we're going to be handing children VR goggles and we're going to be sort of hooking them up to this augmented reality. And it's not really a future, it's already here. So, we gave kids these things for Christmas, not the Wii in this house, but the proverbial Wii. And, what does that really mean going forward in how we foster creativity and how we foster the development of imagination and the make-believe and the pretend? And I really think the sort of long-term reality of that is being sort of a bit thrown to the side as we make every excuse in the book, from, oh, it's been a pandemic, oh, it's we've been busy, and oh, it's fun, and oh, it's just harmless, instead of really kind of having a very sobering and a very honest conversation about this whole thing. And so I did a bit of reading and research to look at statistically where we are in this whole thing before sitting down today. And according to the data, it says that nearly 50% of all children under the age of 8 now have their own tablet device. So something that is theirs, or if not shared with a sibling, that, this is their device to do the games or the watching or the internet or whatever it is that they do with it on their own. And that the same 50% of children spend a rough average of 2.5 hours a day. Now, if we're looking at this statistically, the rough average means the 50th percentile, meaning that 50% or more of these children spend more than this 2.5 hours. And that's quite a significant amount of time in a day if you're thinking about how we divide our day. And it's just really interesting to think about how much of that's been normalized and why we've normalized it so quickly. And so these children, by far and large, are the children of parents who were born before there was the internet, right? In the, mid to late 80s and early 90s, right? So they were born into a world that was still rather analog and came of age in the dawn of the internet. Those of us on the older end of the scheme remember logging into AOL on dial-up and the sort of endless minutes it took to even load a picture, right? You describe this to children these days and it seems barbaric to say the least. But that being said, this is really the first generation that's been born into this fully digital existence where we are handing them phones and handing them tablets. And the reasoning behind it, when I have these conversations with people, is often very unsound, right? And so things like it keeps them busy, or it keeps them quiet, or it allows me to do certain things, while valid reasons cannot be the only part of this discussion. And so many of the studies that have been done speak to there being some sort of long-term damage, but frankly, we don't actually have the data to say this is what happens when these children are adults, or this is what happens 10 years down the line, because it hasn't been that ubiquitous for that long. And so I realize that some of the observations that I've made are merely anecdotal, but it is interesting to look at that shift over time. And so when I started teaching in, let's say roughly 2005, you didn't have the same ubiquity of handheld devices, right? Kids didn't have tablets. Smartphones were a dawning thing, right? And even then they were prohibitively expensive, and mostly only, those in a certain economic bracket, and certainly only adults, had one as their own device, right? And so I watched a difference in the way in which those kids, when I was teaching then, played and interacted and spoke of things. Fast forward to 2018, 2019, 15 years later, it's a marked difference. You see how these devices and this technology have come to play a role in their development, and especially their interaction with others, right? And so, the proverbial image of a group of middle schoolers sat around together, all four of them face buried in a phone, when 10 years ago they might have been playing cards, or they might have been playing the film game like we did, or some other interactive thing that required not only the social interaction, but also the brain power to play the game or to remember something. And so it's really interesting to think about how the nature of social interaction itself has changed so rapidly at light speed, and it's really hard to keep up with, and it's really hard to say that there is any sort of definitive thing. And so, once again, this change that I've noticed is perhaps incremental, perhaps not at its most severe of ends yet, because we don't really know the end result. But none of us can deny that there has been a change, that the way in which children interact, the way in which they learn, the way in which they cognate, all have been altered, and that has to be part of this discussion. And so I read a really interesting metaphor when I was doing a bit of research, and it said that, when we look at the idea of interacting almost exclusively with screens, it would be the physical equivalent of working out only your arm muscles and nothing else. You'd have really strong arm muscles, but at the expense of overall fitness, right? And so no one is saying that there aren't benefits to these certain things, that there isn't something to be said for making children technologically literate in a world that is increasingly dependent on technology. But what are we doing that at the expense of, I think is an important part of this discussion. What else is being sacrificed or put to the wayside in order to just foster this one relationship with technology? And I think that's a really important question. And so one of the large agreements that I think many experts and studies have is how this very dependent relationship with screens, with devices, has affected emotional development. And basically, one of the big reasons I hear for their use, right? So why people give a kid an iPad, or why people say, here's the phone for 20 minutes, is because we use them as these quote unquote shut up toys, right? So that you need something to occupy your kid during the grocery shopping or eating out, right? Oh, I just want to eat dinner in peace for 20 minutes. Here is an iPad. And it works. Nobody's saying it doesn't work. But the question is, what cost is that to the child's development? And many of these studies have pointed to the fact that what it does is it prevents them from learning how to regulate boredom, distress, other impulses, and emotions. And so it's really the equivalent of sort of plugging a very temporary hole in a dam that's not actually going to ever repair the larger structural issues, right? And so when we look at this idea of using the device to occupy the child so that we can get something done, or so that we can have 20 minutes to eat dinner, right? Are we solving a problem as opposed to teaching a lesson? And I think this is a larger quandary in parenting in general, right? So do we just solve a temporary problem, or do we teach a lasting lesson? It's the classic proverb of, giving a man a meal versus teaching him to fish. And I think as parents and as the adults, as the party in this equation between ourselves and our children who has the emotional maturity and wherewithal, we have the sort of duty, I guess, right, to give them the skills as opposed to just giving them the answer. And this also goes back to the idea that we have associated boredom with negativity, right? Well, we don't want them to be bored, right? We don't want them to be bored because they'll act out and they'll make poor decisions. Well, I think there's a flaw in that logic, right? I think when we demonize boredom as something that leads to trouble or something that should be avoided at all costs, we ignore its benefits, right? And so for many people, right, boredom is the space in which creativity and imagination actually happen, right? So that when we're bored and we're set there with nothing to stimulate us, we invent something that will. We play with a sock that we make into a puppet, and we allow the dolls to play pretend, and we allow the space for blocks to become a building and for pencils to create a dream house of our imagination, right? And if we simply fill that boredom with the shut up toy, right? With the easy fix device, then we never give children the skill set to embrace the boredom, understand that silence is healthy sometimes, and understanding that being at ease with oneself is grounding and able to manage. And I think what is alarming is, what does that look like in the future? So what does it look like 15 years down the line, 20 years down the line, when you've got an 18-year-old or a 20-year-old and they have no idea how to manage boredom? They have no idea how to embrace the silence. What will they fill it with? Will it be as innocent as 12 hours of video game a day? Or, will it be binge drinking? Will it be anything to entertain that, as opposed to having been given the skill set to embrace that there is silence sometimes, to embrace that not every moment of the day is filled with stimulation or entertainment or the instant gratification that is what the device does, right? And so I really think it's important to not only look at the age of 0 to 5, but think about what happens from 5 to 10 and 10 to 15 and 15 to 20 and so on. Because at the end of the day, in the earliest stages of a child's life, we are arming them with problem solving skills. We are arming them with an awareness of self. We are giving them the tools to manage their own emotions and their own interactions with the world. And I think it's so important that more of that be done organically, and that more of that be done in a way in which it's not dependent on a device or a piece of technology that simply keeps you busy. And so, that's one huge aspect of it, because I think that becomes a question about lifelong development and sort of the long-term effects of all of this, which once again are unknown, because this is really a brave new world, right? This is a simply unprecedented moment in human evolution, that so much of daily life involves interaction with these various pieces of technology. And so, one of the other things that's discussed too is, aside from this social or socio-emotional aspect of this, right? So this idea that we're allowing children to not necessarily be given the full skill set to regulate themselves, but also just simply how it affects social interaction, right? And so, do they spend the same amount of time really interacting with their peers? Is there a difference between, two children set at the park with phones in their hand facing each other and two children actually playing pretend and running and jumping? And so, the actual physical aspect of it is something to consider as well, as we make children more sedentary because they're spending more time with these devices. What does that mean for their physical health? And, you know, a lot of different health questions have come into play in the last few decades. And we are in a position right now as a country where our children are more unhealthy than they've ever been before. And so, getting them outside, getting them off screens, there's been an increased instance of sort of neck conditions and back conditions simply from just slouching down over these things, not to mention sleep having been disrupted because blue lights emitted from screens have been linked to the suppression of the hormone melatonin. And so it really blows my mind some days when I hear parents talk about giving a child melatonin to sleep because it helps them sleep better. My first question to them would be, how many hours were they on a screen this week, this month, this year? Because guess what? There is uncontrovertible medical evidence that points to the fact that screen time and the blue light emitted by screens directly influences the brain's production of melatonin. So you're telling me the child has trouble sleeping, you're telling me bedtime has become nightmarish, and you're supplementing them by giving them extra melatonin, and you are also still allowing screens in the house. It's mind-boggling. I'm sorry, but it's just, here we are sitting here being shocked that 1 + 1 = 2. And it's frankly mind-blowing to me. But this really circles back to, once again, all of this being really unprecedented because we are a generation that came up before the internet and before these devices and before all of these things. And what did we do, right? How did we pass the time? And our parents' generation before that and the one before that, each of which historically had more children, meaning that inherently, if you look back over history, over time, people not only had more children, but they also had less access to things that made life easier. So, for example, 100 years ago, a woman had 10 children and had to wash clothes on a washboard. And, we complain about the inconvenience of folding laundry in a dryer in our own home that's set there for 2 days. It sits there for 2 days. We all know that we've been there, right? So when you put it all into perspective, the real question is, in an era when the actual day-to-day life has been nearly 100% automated for us. I go back to the story of apparently dishwashers now that order their own soap, right? Homes that turn the lights on, and boxes of baby food that are delivered organically and go in your fridge, right? Each convenience made more accessible than the other. Somehow, in spite of all of that, we seem to have less time and we seem to be busier and we seem to somehow need more things to distract our children so we can get anything done. And I really think that taking a step back and looking at this a bit more meta and really kind of examining what we're saying is part of a conversation that can be had. And I think one of the interesting discussions is I had pretty strong feelings about screen time, about the fact that there would be no handheld devices and no, tablets or smartphones or anything for my child before the age of 5, well before I ever had children. And anytime I'd have a conversation with a parent, they would always be followed by laughter. Oh, you'll see. 6 months into this, you'll see. You'll you'll be singing a new tune. And I always sort of responded, well, you know what? We will see. And so here we are, 2 years into this great experiment of parenting as a primarily stay-at-home parent who also works from home, who also has zero immediate family or any other supplementary childcare in a 2,000-mile radius. And yeah, days are 16 hours long most of the time. But lo and behold, in spite of all of these sort of things, pandemic, sequestration in the house and all, we've still managed to have a zero screen time house. And this is not from a place of braggery or, I told you so or any of those things. It's just the fact that this is the reality that I envisioned and I have continued to live with because I am so leery of the other option. I'm so leery of all of the changes I've seen of, children with sort of different types of cognition and stunted memory abilities, delayed language skills, all of these things that we've started to really understand can be linked to excessive interaction with these devices. And it was simply not worth it for me. Is it more work to do it this way? Yeah, it is. But it is infinitely worth it. And I also really don't know where we got the notion that parenting was meant to be easy, right? Because that's certainly not what I signed up for. That's certainly what I was well aware of after having taught 15 years, that nothing coming to dealing with children, right? Nothing related to their development and their care and their nurturing really ever comes easily, because you're forming and, making a whole human. And frankly, I don't think that has ever been easy, nor will it be. And so that part of the argument really plays no role for me. And so one of the things that I really think is important in this discussion is to talk about, okay, well, what else can we do? How do we reduce the time spent with these devices? And if you are really willing to kind of go, all hands in, eliminate them, because it is possible. And I think that's part of what I'm also here to say, and not from a place of saying, oh, I've solved the parenting riddle, because I most certainly have not, right? But I am here to say that it is possible to raise a child without these devices. That being said, so televisions is a bit of a different story because there's a different kind of interaction. It's not handheld. It doesn't travel everywhere. I do believe that televisions shouldn't be in children's rooms. I think they should be centered in a family part of the house where you are present for what's being watched, where you interact with them as they watch the things. And we're talking about this kind of paradigm up until about the age of 10 or 11, right? And so that when we're talking about middle schoolers and older, it's a different paradigm. But under the age of 10, there really should not be a television in a child's room. There's absolutely no need for it. Most of us were not brought up that way, and our parents most certainly were not, right? So it's a new thing that we've decided should be a thing, and with really no basis of anything except for the fact that we can do that, right? And as for handheld devices, the really most experts who are talking about this will recommend kind of only video chatting with people that they know. So, the far off grandparents or whatever it is, before the age of 3. And after that, highly regulated and really very, very minimal hours per week, not 2.5 hours a day, which once again is the national average. So there are a lot of ways to replace this. And so I think I'd like to sort of conclude by talking about that, talking about the positive, talking about ways in which we can give things to our children that are alternatives to these devices, right? Books, just plain old fashioned books. And for small children, especially. And so we're going to talk about 3 and under right now. There are so many different types of books these days. They've got ones that sing to you and you press buttons and you match the pictures in the stories, and they're endless. And so I've got a toddler who probably has about, you know, 60 of these different kinds of board books, and, only reads a rotation of 5 of them because that's what kids are want to do. Just like, you can buy 8 presents and they'll play with the box because that's what it is. Um, but the books are a wonderful way for them to engage with something. At 2 years old, she'll go and sit in her room for 15, 20 minutes at a time and read, quote unquote, to herself. And now that she's learned the colors, we hear yellow and pink being yelled through the room as she matches the color in the book to the wall. And there's ways in which they can interact with that. And you give them a bookshelf and they can put things back and take them out. And there's an autonomy to it. There's diversity. There's variety to it that really just can't be unmatched. They can be rather expensive, right? So people say, oh, well, who can afford to buy all those books? Well, you know what? I get quite a few of them literally brand new at the Goodwill, at the free cart outside the library. There's so many different ways. Dolly Parton Imagination Library has a wonderful program where they'll send you a free book every month for your kid under 5. Just literally go online, look it up. It's in your area. You sign up for it. She gets wonderful books every month. So, there's so many different ways that you can access, let alone the library where they're free, right? So that's harder with the little ones because they still like to tear and bite and chew things. So I understand the avoiding the library if you don't want to go there. Another great option is what I call the screenless screens. So you've got these leapfrog type devices that have little screens that look like old Game Boys, right? They're not. There's no blue light. There's no sort of interaction as there would be with a device, but they'll do letters and games and numbers and guessing. The fake toys too, the pretend cell phones and the pretend tablets. Like at 15, 16 months old, if you don't show them differently, they don't know differently. I'm sat there with my real phone and she's got her fake one and we pretend to chat and press the buttons, and I promise you they don't know the difference, because that's the beauty of having a 2-year-old. It's kind of easy to fool them sometimes, it turns out. There's just a lot of ways to be creative that way. Flashcards, I am a huge fan of them. You can get a pack at your local drugstore or supermarket for $2, and they've got the letters on the back, and you can play matching and memory. A favorite in our house is throwing all 53 of them or 54 of them on the ground and calling out a letter and saying, find me an A, find me a B. Let's say you have to make dinner, right? And you just are trying to kind of interact, but also do what you're going to do. Throw the cards on the kitchen floor, ask them to bring you a letter, back and forth. You are, as a parent, very naturally able to multitask. It's one of those things that's somewhere in that unwritten manual that we get. Crafts of all sorts. Getting just an art roll of paper online is somewhere about $10, and some washable, non-toxic markers. High chair is a great place to do this. You roll the paper around the top of the tray, let them have at it with a marker. They're non-toxic, they're washable, they wash off. They can, create the colors the older they get. It's a great way to teach shapes numbers, you can write the letters out. There's so many possibilities, all different types of crafts: clay, Play-Doh, popsicle sticks, even fruit peels can be made into little puppets. There's just so many small things around the house that you can turn into crafts. Music is a huge one. And I'm, for my own reasons, not the biggest fan of children's sort of focused music because I think that they benefit from listening to real music, but your own taste is your own taste, right? Dance parties. Toddlers love nothing more than a dance party. So if you're trying to vacuum as well, turn on the music, have them dance with you, have them use their toy vacuum alongside of you. Are they really cleaning? Are they really helping? Once again, they don't know that, right? So it's this question of really just saying, how do I involve you in the task that I'm doing? And are they terribly helpful? Do they sometimes make more of a mess? Yes, right? But at the same time, that giving them the agency and the autonomy also grows their sense of self and their sense of autonomy and ability to do something for 10 minutes on their own, for 20 minutes on their own. And the older that they get, right, the more that time increases and the less of that busy time you have to fill, because naturally you'll start to see them do more on their own and some of that time come back to you. Legos, doll houses, helping you to cook, even if it's giving them a little bowl of flour with some water in it and they just kind of mush it in their hands and they think they're helping to make bread, whether it's true or not. Once again, not really the point, right? Tap shoes, they come in the smallest of toddler sizes and they are a huge hit in our house. They can get a little wooden board and just have them tap tap away. Takes energy out. They're moving. They love the sounds. They're entertained. Even people say, well, what about when you're changing the diaper and they're fussy? Talk to them. Tell them what you're doing. Say, give them the extra wet one and say, can you clean your nose for me? Can you help? It's about giving them agency and involving them in the task, as opposed to just distracting them from the task, keeping them busy. Keep them involved, keep them part of it. People say, oh, well, what about when you're trying to go to the store and you can't get shopping done? Once again, if they're old enough, like 3 and above, you get those little carts and you help them to make good choices. You're giving them the agency too. Kids that get to choose food, and when you teach them to choose well, tend to also be better eaters, right? Because they're more involved in this process. But when they're little, and so I've still got the little one that rides in the cart, we look at numbers and we look at shapes and in each aisle, what's this number and what's this color of things? And it becomes a place of wonder and imagination and involvement, as opposed to just this thing that you're supposed to be distracted from. And so meals and car rides and family time that we tend to just kind of give kids a device to keep them occupied or keep them from being crazy, should be embraced as times of learning and times to teach, right? And so, at a meal, can you count the peas for me? Can you tell me what color this thing is? And this sort of ability to involve them in the things that you're doing is really important. I think the large takeaway I really just want us to have from this is that this time when they're small, this time when they're demanding of constant attention and constant sort of need for you and your interaction with them is short, right? It's precious. It's a mere 3 or 4 years. And while at the time that it's happening, it might feel endless, I understand. We had an episode this season talking about how the days are long, but the years are short. Know that it is short, and that the more autonomy and ability to self-regulate and ability to manage self you give them now, when they're 5 and 6 and 7 and older, you'll have that adult time back. You'll have that peace at a meal. But for now, life is chaotic, life is messy, life is busy, as it should be, because it is the most wondrous of time in their lives where you get to teach them about the world and you get to show them that it is full of wonder and imagination and color and light and shapes and textures and smells and scents. So I implore you, embrace that, and please put the screens and the phones down. Thank you. If you'd like to continue this discussion or follow us, you can do so at www.alltheunexpected, one word, alltheunexpected.com, on social media at the same thing, unexpected. We look forward to hearing from you, your thoughts, your comments, your opinions. Have a wonderful week and stay blessed.